10x your service design offering with Smaply. Take 20% off any order with This Is HCD 20 off. Let's superpower you and your design team's potential. Sign up at smaply.app. Enjoy the episode from your friends at Smaply, helping support This Is HCD podcast.
Hello and welcome to Bringing Design Closer. My name is Gerry Scullion and I'm a service designer and founder of This Is HCD and CEO of This Is Doing, a live class design and innovation company providing training in the skills of service designers, design researchers, product managers, user experience designers and much more. In this episode, I speak with Bulelani Mfaco, a South African asylum seeker and activist based in Ireland, and he's a spokesperson for MASI, the movement of asylum seekers in Ireland, and is an active voice in shedding light from within one of Ireland's direct provision centres, Knocklisheen in County Limerick. Now, to give some context to this direct provision scheme, in 1991 only 9 people sought asylum in Ireland compared to 3,883 in 1997. Now, this caused alarm to the Irish and the Irish government at the time, but rather tackle and provide a safe refuge for these people who are vulnerable, they created a scheme to detract or reframe that the Irish, and to quote, social welfare system was in some way attracting asylum seekers to this state. Now, some people listening may also ask how this topic is related to design, and it is absolutely interrelated. The awful experiences that Bulelani and the thousands of people in the direct provision centres are facing are a direct result of a system that was created by the Irish government in 1997. These experiences were not designed, or if they were designed, they weren't designed to appeal. Now, this episode is an example of a system that was not created from a human-centred design perspective, not in the slightest. As an Irish person, I am extremely embarrassed that this scheme is still in existence, and even though an updated new Irish government has committed to dissolving direct provision, we discuss in this episode what that might look like with Bulelani. Now, as you'll hear, Bulelani is a remarkable person. He's easily one of my favourite guests and deserves so much more and so much better than he is being given. Now, I'll place links to MASI and also links to Bulelani in his Twitter in the show notes, but I'll also place a direct access to Bulelani's PayPal account, so if you would like to donate some money towards him. Now, I should also point out that there are topics in this episode that may trigger, such as sexual violence. But let's get straight into this episode. Bulelani Mfaco, a very warm welcome to Bringing Design Closer. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks, and thank you for having me.
Man, absolutely no problem. As we were saying beforehand, the reason why we're both free at this time was Design Politics was meant to be happening right at this moment. You were meant to be delivering a keynote in person, in Dublin, on stage. But thanks to the wonderful COVID-19 that wiped out all our dreams for this year, but hopefully maybe next year when we get to do that, we'll have you back.
Yeah. COVID cancelled quite a lot of things. I thought I would have a busy year, but we are halfway and there's nothing moving.
It's such a rude virus, it's just really, it's so inconvenient for everyone,
Yeah.
But for anyone who doesn't know Bulelani Mfaco, he was one of our keynote speakers, and Bulelani is an activist, and he's an integral part of the MASI movement in Ireland, which is the movement of asylum seekers. And today we're just going to have a chat about direct provision and understand what it is and how this came about. But before we get into that, Bulelani, maybe tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
I come from the Republic of South Africa. I was born in the Eastern Cape of South Africa and grew up in a very rural part of the country. It's very remote that it took me about 8 hours or so to go from Cape Town to my village. That's where, and you can only get there by bus. You can't fly the airport. The nearest airport is usually closed or doesn't have any flights from Cape Town. So it was a bit, it's funny when we got the first case of COVID-19 in South Africa, we're like, oh, no, Our parents will be safe in rural villages because it's very remote. Nobody's going to get there with corona. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it did happen. Few people
Wow.
who lived in cities, as soon as it was announced that there will be a lockdown, they traveled
Mm.
back to their villages, and some of them traveled with COVID-19, and that was the terrible part. But I grew up in a rural part until 2001 when I moved to Cape Town. Spent most of my adult life in Cape Town. Openly gay man, which is one of the reasons why I left my country, because a lot of LGBT plus people were targeted for either rape if you are a lesbian woman, or they call it corrective rape, where they target lesbian women and rape them. And then you would face similar or even beatings or death if you are an
Mm.
openly gay person, depending on which part of the country you lived in and what your socioeconomic circumstances are.
Wow.
So from 2015, I would have come to Ireland.
Yeah. Well, it's just such a brutal story. You recounted a story of living on a road where a lesbian woman was murdered,
Yeah, yeah.
and obviously that has a traumatic effect on you.
It is because she wasn't the first person to be murdered in that
Wow.
manner. It was Noluva Solindau, and she and I would have she lived down the road from where I lived, and she was
Mm.
the only openly gay woman in the street, and there were two other openly gay people. It was me and another young man who lived on the same street. And when she was abducted, this would have happened in December of 2016. I learned about
Mm.
it when I traveled to South Africa in 2017, January 2017, and I heard that she was
Wow.
abducted from her house
Yeah.
and she was shot dead in an open field, like an execution kind of thing. And that was awful. Awful for she had just started living with somebody else, her partner, and the partner only survived because she was hiding in the bed. She was
Wow.
hiding in the bedroom. That's the only reason she survived. Otherwise, she would have also been murdered in that scene. And it
That's
is,
brutal.
it's quite awful when you live there because
Mm.
when you read something like that, you see it in the news or you hear that somebody who lives down the road was murdered because of her sexual orientation. And you kind of think, well,
Yeah.
next, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's just it's a brutal story, and from when you heard that story, and obviously that has an effect on you, and you're like, well, I could be next, as you said.
no.
What were the steps between then and becoming an asylum seeker in Ireland?
It took me 4 days to get the flight. I was in South Africa back when I heard about her passing. I knew somebody had been murdered. I just didn't
Mm.
know it was somebody that lived there. I would have read it when I was in Dublin still, but I
Yeah.
didn't know that it was somebody who lived actually that close to where I lived.
Yeah.
So when I got to Cape Town and I heard it, I was like, okay, this is
I
it.
need to get out.
I had my suitcases and I didn't even unpack. I was like, okay, then the next available flight is mine, and I'm going back to Dublin, and I'm never coming back to this place. I remember sitting down with my little brother. I hadn't seen him for about 2 years, and he was asking me about. We were talking about life. He had left South Africa for the United States for about a year coaching, and then went back to Cape Town, and he was telling me how different it was going back to Cape Town because his attitude had changed dramatically. Like he got onto a train in Cape Town with and took out his laptop and was busy working in the train. I was like, "Are you insane?" And he was actually robbed because somebody followed him from the train station. As soon as he got out of the train, they followed him and then they took his train. I was like, well, were you insane? Why did you do that? No, you don't do that. He was like, well, in New York, that's what I would have done. In any other part of
Yeah.
the United States, that was I would have done. I was like, well, you're in South Africa, and
Yeah.
we were then just recounting our experiences of the trauma of having to live in Cape Town, where you have to literally watch your back all the time. And that was it for me. I was like, no, I don't want to just survive. I want to live. And to live, I need to leave the country.
Yeah. So you've been in Ireland for about 5 years, and You're currently living in Limerick in one of the direct provision centres. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm in Knocklisheen. It's a state-owned one. It's one of the few that are owned by the Irish government. It's operated privately by Aramark. It's been in operation for about 19 years. I'm in one of the rooms actually now. It's called the relaxation room. It's how big is it? It's not that big, but it has two couches and a rocking chair. I'm sitting on the rocking chair. But other than that, we'd have to the rooms would normally, it's built with prefabs, so it's like cardboard kind of thing when you're bang against the wall. It's like the same material that's used to build. What else do they build with it? It's not even a shipping
prefab.
container. Yeah, it's prefab kind of building.
Yeah.
And they would have like 6 blocks, and 4 of them are occupied by single men, and then the 2 would be occupied by single women and families. So it's a mixed center. Some centers would be only for men, but as we know from past experience that there was a transgender woman who was forced to live in a provision center that's meant for men only. That was in Galway. So it's never really for men only. It depends on the bigotry of the Irish state. We've had situations where a direct provision center where we thought it was only for men had 4 women, for instance, with sharing the space with over 100 single men. So you can imagine the experiences of women in that environment, because we know from even centers where there is actually a good mix of the population is have a good number of single women, single men, families, and children, that single women tend to experience harassment because they are assumed to be available if they are single. Whereas if you were married and had your husband there, nobody would bother you. So you can imagine then the experience of being 4 single women in a direct provision center with over 100 single men. It's almost like harassment on a daily basis.
Yeah, I can imagine. So for our listeners who don't know what direct provision is, tell us a little bit about it. I know it's 20 years old, and I don't mean to sound like that's a good thing that it's 20 years old. Let's talk about what direct provision is.
Well, when a person claims asylum, in most countries, there would be some sort of reception system in place. And the reception system involves 2 parts. One is the administrative part, so the actual filling in the asylum claim form and making sure that you submit the claim form and submit to the processes of having to assess your asylum claim. So that may mean being invited to an interview and that sort of thing. In some countries in the global south, the asylum process only involves that part, the administrative part. So if you claimed asylum in South Africa, the only thing the state would do for you is just process the asylum claim. So you submit your form, and nobody cares where you live. Nobody cares what kind of circumstances you'll be. Like, as long as the form is submitted, that's it. The South African state is done with it. They'll give you your asylum permit to stay in the country, which allows you to work. If you get sick, they'll tell you that you can go to a hospital like anybody else. But that's just it. There is no material provision. Whereas in most developed countries, there is a reception system that entails the provision of material supports. So, for example, if you claimed asylum in Ireland or Sweden or Germany, the state commits to provide you with shelter, food, and your everyday needs while your asylum claim is being processed, because there would be restrictions in terms of entering the labor market. For instance, you are not allowed to work immediately when you claim asylum in Ireland. You'll wait for 9 months before you are allowed to work, and you'll only be allowed to work after 9 months if you have not had a first instance decision. Before 2017, Ireland was one of the few countries in the EU who banned asylum seekers from ever working until the determination of their asylum status. So you weren't allowed to work at all. So before that, asylum seekers would have spent about 5 to 10 years in asylum reception centers, which we call direct provision centers, waiting for asylum decisions, not being allowed to work. And they would have gotten a weekly allowance of 1910. It was increased to 2160. And then from 2160, it was now increased. It's currently at 3880 per week. that each adult would get. And so that's the spending money. It's just about €5.50 or something like that per day that an asylum seeker would receive when in what the Taoiseach or the Irish Prime Minister calls spending money. It's deeply infantilizing because you are not expected to do anything except wake up, go queue for your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner in the canteen. In most direct provision centers like the one I live in, we are not allowed to work. So you can imagine at Christmas time, families would ordinarily be preparing their Christmas meals, but here we're not allowed to work, so we'll have to eat whatever the managers or the staff decide. It's usually a cold Christmas supper anyway, that's served at 12, and you can eat it later on. It's served at 12 because the staff need to go home to cook for their own families and have proper Christmas dinners. So most people would have spent quite a number of years in direct provision, not being allowed to work, not having any agency over their bodies or themselves. Like, you don't get to decide what to do. Your life, everyday life, is very restricted in terms of what you can do based on where you are located, but also based on the fact that you cannot work. And so you can imagine when you have children, it means you won't be able to work and provide for your children's material needs. You will be dependent on what the state provides and what the members of the public who donate things to direct provision centers provide. So we had instances where mothers with infants were left with no nappies and baby formula and having to beg Irish people to go and drop off nappies and baby formula, for instance. So the process itself, direct provision, has been criticized by numerous human rights bodies and people who live in direct provision. Like the UN, for instance, there's two committees in the UN, one on economic and social political rights, criticizes the violation of human rights because you strip people of their dignity when you don't allow people to work and live independently. It's almost like you're treated like a prisoner, except that the gate is open for you to go to wherever you want to go. But if you do not come back in the evening, you might lose your bed. That would mean being on the streets. Whereas if you are in a prison, you wouldn't be allowed out of the gate. That's the only difference between a prison and a direct provision center, is that you are open to go, but then going anywhere will mean even further destitution.
Yeah.
So quite a lot of people would have, I think about 60,000 people would have stayed in direct provision centers since its inception.
Wow. It's I know I've looked at the numbers. I know the numbers are going down, but in terms of people who are in the direct provision scheme, and as of, I think it was 3 days ago in the Irish Times, they said that the next government that are being formed at the moment are going to possibly look at dissolving the direct provision scheme, which would be amazing.
Yeah.
But what do you think that might look like if they do dissolve it? What would you like to see?
Well, one of the problems with direct provision is depression, because a lot of people in direct provision centers would have survived or escaped traumatic experiences, deeply traumatic experiences from their countries. And when they are then stripped of personal autonomy and stripped of the right to privacy, for instance, their rooms may be overcrowded for single people, and families would have to share intimate living spaces with other families and other strangers. And so the one thing that we want to see is to ensure that the right to privacy is vindicated in whatever alternative to direct provision is implemented by the government. It must ensure the vindication of the right to privacy and the fundamental human right to dignity, which is, by the way, inviolable in EU law. But in Ireland, for the last 20 years, the Irish government has stripped asylum seekers of that right to dignity by warehousing them in direct provision centers to enrich their companies operate direct provision centers. Some rooms, you can imagine, before the pandemic, we had rooms that had as many as 8 single men in one tiny bedroom, cramped space with no space to move. Like, you can imagine having to live your life for 5 years or 10 years of your life in that cramped space, sharing a private bedroom with 7 other men. For about 5 years, you didn't have much of a life.
No.
Like, there is no such thing as sexual life, for instance. Dating life becomes almost impossible. in that environment for the next 5 years. So you're not expected to leave. We want to ensure that whatever system is in place defends the right to privacy and the right to dignity. The other thing is, it also contributes to the person's mental health. Again, the EU directive on reception conditions for asylum seekers requires Ireland to ensure that the standard of living is provided, a suitable standard of living is maintained in whatever form of accommodation is provided. So the idea of having cramped bedrooms, for instance, is actually, it cannot be said that it provides a suitable standard of living for the people who have to exist in that environment. And that is one of the things we need to ensure that doesn't happen in an alternative to direct provision. The congregated nature of direct provision, we've had one of the biggest, actually the biggest direct provision center is MASI, which is a former holiday camp in right north of Dublin. It's like a massive ghetto, because there you will have 800 or so asylum seekers in that center. Quite a lot of them are in a better position than other direct provision centers because they have their own private spaces. So each one would have, each family unit, for instance, would have its own living space that is not shared with others. But the problem is that it's a huge ghetto. We have all these people who are all migrants, who come from different parts of the world, speak different languages in one little demarcated area, who have the same income, which is 38.80 per week. Quite a lot of the families who live in MASI direct provision centers would have their own spaces, but they would all earn similar amounts of money. So they would have 38.80 per week, and they would be very restricted in terms of accessing the labor market in Ireland, even after getting their status. We know from the Gerry Institute that migrants in general would find difficulty in entering employment, and when they do find employment, promotion becomes another challenge. So they may be underemployed. You might find somebody who is very highly qualified in their own country, working, for instance, as a cleaner, which is nothing wrong with a cleaner, but there is everything wrong with it if you are actually you have a PhD in a particular field. So you find people who are teachers, for instance, not working as teachers because they can't afford to actually go through the registration process of being recognized as a teacher in Ireland.
Yeah. So I guess just to go back to that, like there's a huge problem there with integration into the Irish society and just in general, from a human rights aspect and how people are being treated and living in these spaces and in these conditions. It's just not appropriate. So like on behalf of my friends and, my peers in the broader community, I want to apologize from the Irish people that this has had to happen. I feel somewhat ashamed that this has happened in our country because like for centuries, well, for maybe not centuries, but definitely since the 1800s, we've gone to all four corners of the world of the Irish people and integrated into other societies. So it seems like we've missed a huge opportunity of having, hugely diverse people come into our society, which is really needed.
Yeah,
so
the problem with
to say that.
Yeah, thank you for that. The problem with direct provision is that when it was created in 1999, the idea behind it was to deter people from coming to Ireland to claim asylum, and that argument has always been maintained by Irish politicians whenever campaigners are calling for direct provision to be abolished. Even as recently as the government formation talks, the Minister for Justice is cited as saying that if we improve it too much, it might just attract economic migrants. So they admit that it is awful. So we'll treat you inhumanely if it helps us deter others from coming to Ireland, which is quite an awful thing for the Irish state to do.
Because to acknowledge it as well is super weird.
Yeah, they've gone as far as acknowledging it in court when they were arguing against giving asylum seekers the right to work. They didn't wake up and suddenly decide, because of the kindness of their good conscience, they will give asylum seekers the right to work in 2017.
Yeah.
Before that, an asylum seeker who had spent 8 years in indirect provision took the Minister for Justice to court for the right to work and won in the courts. And one of the reasons why they won, the court said the denial of the right to access gainful employment actually breaches the fundamental human right to dignity, because it changed the man's self-esteem. It changed the way he looked at himself. He felt worthless, basically, because he wasn't working. He was sitting and watching people go to work every single day, every day of his life for 8 years, in limbo, not knowing when he'll get a decision on his asylum claim.
Yeah.
So I think it has always been in the consciousness of the Irish state apparatus. So the political class knew for the past 20 years that it is actually awful, but they just didn't want to do anything about it because it was the most convenient way of deterring people. That's what they think it does anyway, but it actually doesn't, because Ireland is very hard to reach for people in the global south. You have to literally go through another country in order to get here.
Yeah.
There are very few direct flights, and that's one of the reasons why Ireland has had low numbers of people coming in. You mentioned there that Irish people have gone to all corners of the world. There are 30,000 or so Irish people who call South Africa home, and there are only about 3,000 South Africans who call Ireland home. So maybe we owe you 27,000 of us. But the point about integration is that for people to be integrated in any functioning society, they have to be integrated into the social life of the country. They have to be integrated in the economical life of the country through work. They also have to be integrated into the political life of the country. Ireland does the two brilliantly, except for economical life, which makes it difficult to integrate into social life if you aren't working. So they might allow asylum seekers to vote, for instance, in local government elections. You can even run as a candidate if you're an asylum seeker. Very few parts of the world do that. I don't know that many actually who allow migrants to vote.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's no good if you are allowed to vote if you actually can't work. If you are restricted in terms of accessing the labor market.
It has a huge impact on self-worth, on being able to provide and being able to earn. And, there's been times in my life where I haven't been able to work, and what's your current status yourself? Are you able to work? Because I know you studied in UCD for a while.
Yeah, I do have the right to work, but the problem with it is that it's very restrictive in terms of the permit itself, for example, is only valid for 6 months, and it's given on a piece of paper. Other non-EU nationals who are allowed to work in Ireland would have what we called then a GNIB card, or the Irish Residency Permit card, standard immigration permit card that's issued across the EU. To migrants who are ordinarily resident within in the EU who are from the non-EU countries.
Yeah.
It's not given to asylum seekers, and that means that a lot of employers didn't actually know that asylum seekers were allowed to work. When they first saw the work permit that was given to asylum seekers in a piece of paper, they didn't even know if it was authentic enough. Like they didn't know how to authenticate it, because it's just a piece of paper with a lot of restrictions. Like you have to report to the Department of Justice that you are employing this person, and you have to make sure that at least half of your staff are from the EU. You have to make sure that whenever the state asks you for a report on this person, you provide it within 10 days. Otherwise, it's a criminal offense. And so there are a lot of things like that written on the work permit that deters. It makes a lot of employers uncomfortable when it comes to offering jobs to asylum seekers. And the other thing is that it only restricts asylum seekers to low paid and short-term work, because the permit is valid for about 6 months. We've been campaigning for it to be changed to be valid for 12 months, and for it to be issued on the same basis as other non-EU nationals who are in the state, so that there is parity in terms of accessing the labor market.
Yeah. I remember when I was researching, there was about 20,000 asylum seekers in 1999, I think it was. And how many people are currently now an asylum seeker in Ireland in direct provision?
It wasn't 20,000. I think it was 12,000.
12,000.
I think the
you're right.
highest number
12,000.
at one given year was 2000, around 2002 or 2001. And it was about 12,000. That's the highest number in a given year who claimed asylum in Ireland ever.
Yeah.
And currently, it's about 7,000 people who are in the system, who are in direct provision centers around the country, and commercial hotels. They started using commercial hotels towards the end of 2018 because the direct provision centers were at full capacity. My center has the capacity is 250 people. We had 249 people at one given point, and so that was at maximum capacity. That meant that a person claiming asylum in arriving in Dublin, claiming asylum, would be taken to either a B&B or a guest house or a hotel, and the cost went up exponentially. For instance, the average stay in a hotel cost each asylum, the state on each asylum seeker about €3,000 per month. On €3,000 per month, you could rent an apartment in Dublin. And it's very expensive to rent an apartment in Dublin. But you could rent in the Grand Canal Docks, 2-bedroom apartment for that and get change, So for the Irish state, the policy didn't make sense to keep thousands of people in direct provision centers when you could provide supports for them to live independently in the community, and it would cost much less, and also eliminate the human cost of direct provision, because as you mentioned, that a lot of people would be quite depressed when they are not working, and asylum seekers would be depressed not just because they aren't allowed to work, but because of the traumatic experiences that people have gone through. It's actually documented that 1 in every 2 asylum seekers in Ireland suffers from PTSD. So you can imagine then the trauma of having to live or exist in a direct provision system with no personal autonomy at all.
Well, what I'm hearing here is like people have fled awful situations. And there doesn't seem to be of any acknowledgement in the fact that when these people enter our shores, that they've got trauma and they're carrying this trauma with them, and that needs to be dealt with, that needs to be cared for, and needs to be nurtured, because it just manifests. And there's a responsibility on the country that receives these asylum seekers to help them deal with that.
And it's compounded by putting people in direct provision centers, because in direct provision there are different vulnerable groups like children, LGBT plus people, women, for instance. So you can imagine being a child in a direct provision center. One of the reports that came out in 2012, for example, said that a third of people who report to rape crisis centers in Ireland are minors were minors at the time of the assault. And these would have been people who came from direct provision centers. And we've had reports of sexual harassment of single women. I, as a gay man, have been forced to share a bedroom with a homophobic man in a direct provision center, because you don't get to decide who you share a bedroom with. When my first roommate in Knocklisheen found out that I'm gay, he said, "I don't like that shit. Boys are supposed to be with girls." Like, we were there, we were like expected to share an intimate space like a bedroom with somebody who actually can't stand gay people. And I claimed asylum on the basis that I would be killed in my country for no reason other than my sexual orientation. So you can imagine then the anxiety. Like, my GP had to prescribe sleeping pills, and quite a lot of asylum seekers are either on sleeping pills or antidepressants, primarily because the inappropriate nature of the accommodation facilities that are provided for asylum seekers actually compounds the trauma that people would have experienced from back home. And the only thing that the state does in mental health care in Ireland would be, once you waited for years and years for an appointment, or months for an appointment in the HSC's mental health, you then either get sleeping pills or antidepressants, which only serve to numb the trauma rather than actually address help you process trauma. So we've had a lot of people in direct provision centers who either end up in hospital or in mental health institutions, or dying by suicide. As recently as April, somebody was found dead in a hotel in a hotel that was contracted by the Irish government, the Central Hotel. It was a young man, actually. I think he was 19 or so when he was found dead at lunchtime in his hotel room. And it was said that he had died by suicide. And there are a lot of others who would have died by suicide. Last year in March, another young man was found dead next to the direct provision center by suicide. And he had only been in Ireland for 6 months. So you can imagine the level of trauma that people would have gone through in their home countries, and then to be placed in a position where they are actually not being helped to deal with that trauma. The only one organization in Ireland that provides, that is accredited to providing support for survivors of torture, for example, is Spirasi, and that organization has been calling out for more resources to be allocated to them because they don't have enough to be able to provide supports that is needed immediately when a person needs that support. So we've had people waiting months and months for appointments with psychiatrists and all the relevant supports that they would get from Spirasi, for example.
Well, it's definitely not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
It's an awful situation. What's been the sort of feedback that you've been receiving from the Irish, like on Twitter? That's how we connected actually originally. Like I was following MASI when I moved back from Australia. I was like, wow, this I couldn't believe direct provision was still a thing in Ireland, because I actually grew up next to MASI and I worked in MASI, believe it or not, back in the day. So I know exactly the rooms that you're talking about that those people are living in. And a ghetto was probably how I described it when it was actually, a holiday centre. So I don't know what it would be like now in the current situation. It sounds awful. But when you're out on Twitter, like, how have you been received by the Irish people? That's something I want to chat more about.
Well, Twitter is a very different space altogether, because on Twitter you get all kinds of vile people. People can be very vile on Twitter, even because it allows for anonymity. People can create accounts and not have any profile pictures or real names, for instance. But it's been very different through the experience of going to towns. I've traveled to almost all the counties in Ireland. The only county I have not been to is Donegal, and I haven't been to Monaghan, and I have not been to Waterford. Which other county? I think that's just about it, actually.
Waterford's lovely.
I haven't been down there. I have a few friends who live there, though, but I'll make a point to go there. But I've traveled to different counties in Ireland, go to schools, universities, community centers, and speaking to different Irish people. And quite a lot of them are appalled by direct provision, and quite a lot of them are eager to do something about it and just don't know what it is. Well, the other thing that they can do is actually vote, use their vote. Even the threat of not voting for a candidate on the basis of their position on direct provision, we found that actually motivates the candidates to adopt a position that would see direct provision abolished. So we've done quite a lot of work in terms of building consensus with Irish people in the rest of the country, but social media is a very different environment altogether. So you get quite a lot of support and you get quite a lot of negatives from social media. But we've been overwhelmed with supports that we've received from Irish people in general. Our social media following keeps growing. Even donations, for example, I think in this month alone we got 70,000 euro.
That's correct.
By Saturday, we had just over 70,000 euro donated in less than a month, basically. Ordinarily, MASI is a grassroots group, so it's run by volunteers who are asylum seekers or have been in the asylum system. So some people who would have formed MASI would have left direct provision after getting their status and still remained involved. But it's 100% voluntary. So we don't have any paid staff. The money that we get would either be used for campaign work or to provide supports to asylum seekers. So, for instance, when we heard that there was a mother with triplets in the center that I actually live in Knocklisheen, we sent one for all vouchers just for them to buy material goods that they would need for the baby while they are waiting for their PPS cards, which would then allow them to access the petty weekly allowance that they would get. So we got quite a lot of public support for about 5 years now. We are in our sixth year that MASI was formed, and we've been operating on a voluntary basis. Whenever we call out for help from Irish people or other migrants who live in Ireland who support our work, we get whatever we ask for.
Yeah.
We resolved last year to organize a conference, and when we made that resolution, we literally had no money. But we said we're going to organize a conference, and it was spectacular. We saw people coming together from all walks of life. We saw artists, activists from other grassroots movements like Queer
Yeah.
Action Ireland, Black Pride Ireland, MERGE, which is the Migrants and Ethnic Minorities for Reproductive Justice, coming to the fore. Even the students, Irish student unions, both in second level student union and the third level, which is the university student union, were supportive of the campaigns and that we've run. And trade unions, I have something to do with trade unions. This Friday, I think I have to speak with trade unions, but they've provided support. SIPTU, which is a trade union federation, gives us their building whenever we need a larger venue for whatever gatherings. Ordinarily, you would pay money to use their building,
Absolutely.
but they've provided that support for us over the years.
The majority of good Irish people are what I would call incredible, and I mean that. I'm not just saying that because I'm Irish, but the level of sincerity and intent from the Irish people is really second to none. When it comes to the charitable aspects of how we live in society, we do dig deep, as they say. But I guess, what does life look like after direct provision? So, say it was dissolved. What does it look like for Buelani Mfaco?
Well, we envisage that once direct provision is abolished, an asylum seeker would not stay for longer than 90 days within a reception center. So there has to be still some sort of reception.
Where do you go?
Because people would be coming to the country anyway, and some people land at Dublin airport with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and so they do need the support. But the way that support is provided, it must be on par with the way the Irish state provides supports for you. For instance, if you were to be homeless tomorrow or destitute or unemployed. So we expect to be treated no differently to the way that the state would treat you, because the way that it works currently is that I, as an asylum seeker, would be immediately taken to a reception center, and from there I would be taken to anywhere in the country in a direct provision center, where I'm expected to literally wait until I have my status determined. Only then the state commits to treating me on the same basis as you. What we ideally want is to move away from the model where that accommodation is provided by the Department of Justice. From experiences that we know, the Department of Justice does not have the expertise to provide accommodation or to manage accommodation for anybody except for prisoners, really. Because that's the only other people who are accommodated by the Department of Justice. Prisoners, Irish prisons, are run by the Department of Justice. And so we want to move away from there to take the provision of accommodation for asylum seekers to the Department of Housing and local authorities, as is the case for Irish people and other homeless people in the country. The other thing that we want to eliminate is the profiteering through the direct provision system. So currently it's run for profit. A lot of corporations like Aramark, who have operations in US prisons, for example, are also operating direct provision centers. And we want to eliminate that element of profiteering because it allows for abuse. For instance, when it comes to the provision of food, you generally provide it in the cheapest possible form that you can do to maximize your profit. And you would warehouse asylum seekers in rooms. You remember the rooms I was telling you about, having 8 people in one bedroom. That means that the operator or the owner of that direct provision center gets at minimum no less than €8,400 per month for that one bedroom.
Wow.
For one bedroom. Because on average, the spending on an asylum seeker in a direct provision center is typically €1,050 per month in a direct provision center. But in an emergency direct provision center, it would be €3,000 per month. for each asylum seeker. So you can imagine and you don't get paid for the physical space, you get paid for the number of people. So you are contracted capacity. So putting people in 8 people in one bedroom is quite profitable for those companies who operate direct provisions, and we want to eliminate that. The other thing is we want to ensure that the state imposes a statutory limit for not only stays in the reception center, so in the actual processing of asylum claims, because people have been kept in legal limbo for 8 to 10 years in direct provision, not knowing that if they will be allowed to stay in Ireland or not. And we've seen people who have spent as many as 8 years being served with a deportation order at the end of that 8 years. So for 8 years, you were stripped of your dignity, your right to privacy, you weren't allowed to work, you were literally confined to poverty and degradation for 8 years, and then the state suddenly tells you to sort of go back to where you came from. That's just cruel. And so we want to ensure that they impose a statutory limit on the actual processing of asylum claims, so that you reach decisions on the determination of the person's status not only quicker, but also in a fair and procedure, because we've had experiences where gay people, for example, are asked to prove their sexual orientation. How the hell am I going to prove my sexual orientation?
I know. I can't answer that, but
it's ludicrous.
It's ludicrous. So silly.
Yeah.
It's so silly. So, hopefully the direct provision scheme is dissolved, but I would encourage, if there's anyone from the Irish government listening, that you take a human-led approach. You speak to these people who are going through the process, and you include them in the process to design a more fit-for-purpose service, because it's not about dissolving it, it's about creating something that's going to evolve and meet the needs and bridge and include them, be inclusive in how you design these things. It's just not a case of just ending the direct provision scheme and rebranding it and relabeling it with something else. Yeah, and that's typically what governments do. They said, okay, we've ended direct provision, and they just reproduce it and call it something different.
And that's the fundamental problem that we'll be guiding against, because quite a lot of ideas have been floated around on how the alternative should work. I remember one spokesperson for justice in Fianna Fáil party, which is one of the parties negotiating to form government, was suggesting something like foster care for asylum seekers. Like, do you not realize how infantilizing that is, to have to pay an Irish person to look after an asylum seeker as if the asylum seeker is inherently incapable of looking after themselves? Like, the ideas that are thrown around, some of them can be quite disturbing. They come from a place of wanting to care, but you actually need to sit down and ask yourself as an adult, how would you want to be treated if you were in that position?
Let's see what Charlie Flanagan is like if we stick him into direct provision for 6 months.
6 months might be too short for him. Just give him 2 years. Do you know what he did? When one of the TDs, Fine Gael TDs, made quite racist statements about migrants in the country, saying children as young as 3 years old were being radicalized in direct provision centers to be terrorists. I'm like, and Charlie Flanagan was managing her campaign. There was a by-election. Her name is Verona Murphy, I think it's in Wexford, where she was campaigning for election to the Irish Parliament. And Charlie Flanagan invited her to a direct provision center to have tea with asylum seekers to cleanse her of her racism. I was like, that's the only time you go to a direct provision center to cure your racism? Who told you that it's going to cure your racism?
It's embarrassing. So hopefully we're, that breed of politician is, slowly dying out in government, because they themselves are not fit for purpose. And it's not cool.
Yeah, we've got quite a number of allies in who are coming through that are actually, even surprisingly, from Fianna Fáil. We didn't think we'd get a lot of support from them, but quite a lot of them were supportive of our cause.
Yeah, well, hopefully, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen marches in Ireland, and I've definitely felt, over the last 6 months in particular, that there seems to be a lot more positivity and more action around the MASI. People are speaking about it. I know, a couple of weeks ago, my wife leant over to me and said, the MASI movement, is that because my wife knows you, even though she's never met you? She goes, is Bulelani part of MASI? And I said, yeah, that's the MASI movement. And the mothers groups were circulating because we've had another baby, and there's these threads of conversations about what's happening for young mothers, in direct provision.
Yeah.
And we're all putting packs together and sending them into the direct provision centres and stuff. So like that stuff wasn't happening 2 years ago, but it's happening now, and it's part of the conversation that I'm seeing in society. And people are like, that's not cool. We didn't know about it. Like that's what some people are saying to us. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's been there,
Yeah, quite a lot of people are shocked when they hear the experiences of asylum.
Absolutely. This can't happen in Ireland. We shouldn't happen. Like, this is not how, the common Irish person would like to see these. All of you need to be treated with respect and dignity. Yeah. It's just not what we're about. So again, I've said it before, but I apologize that this is the way this has happened. It's not the Irish way.
Hopefully that apology will come from a Taoiseach someday if they admit their failures.
Yeah, there's an admission of guilt there. I don't know, 99 when it was formed, was that a Fianna Fáil government, was it? Probably would have been.
Yeah.
Fianna Fáil government.
We'll blame them another coalition. Well, the saying is that Fianna Fáil introduced direct provision and Fine Gael loved it.
Okay. Yeah, so it's crazy, Bulelani, I'd love to have you back on the show in a couple of months just to check in and see how things are going, and hopefully by that stage direct provision is a thing of the past.
Hopefully,
and I know you're part of that process of not mediating with the government and giving feedback. Is that correct?
They set up Minister Shirley Flanagan set up an advisory group last year, and there was a strong call from civil society for MASI to be included in that group, and so I was chosen to be the representative for MASI. Meeting with them tomorrow, actually. We're meeting via Zoom. We've had to cancel all face-to-face meetings because of COVID. But it allowed us to meet even more regularly. We used to meet once a month, and now we are meeting once every week, trying to produce a report which is due for September, I think. It's due for September, and we'll make recommendations on what the alternative may look like. I'm not very optimistic, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Like the interim recommendations were very pathetic. Like the only difference was on access to the labour market. Other than that, it was simply telling the Irish government to obey the law. Like on bank accounts, the EU law actually requires Irish banks to facilitate asylum seekers opening bank accounts, because you would know that many asylum seekers don't even have a passport when they arrive at the port of entry. They might not have any documentation, for example. And how do they then open bank accounts? The law requires that banks facilitate that process of opening bank accounts. Yes, and it hasn't been happening. Same with driving licenses and vulnerability assessment and meeting and addressing those exceptional vulnerabilities or material reception condition needs that people are identified to have been vulnerable when they are assessed has not been happening, which is a legal requirement, but that hasn't been happening, and the advisory group recommended that it should happen. So it didn't address the interim recommendations from the group, didn't address all the core problems that we have seen, for instance, poverty, that children are forced to grow up in indirect provision. That wasn't addressed by the interim recommendations. So we'll see how it goes in the end.
Yeah, well, hopefully something good happens.
Yeah.
Bulelani, it was brilliant. I'll put a link to your own Twitter feed and also to MASI in the show notes for this episode. And if anyone wants to support the MASI movement, I'll throw a link to their, I know they've got I think it's a PayPal donation link as well, so I'll put a link to that as well. And also to your own, I know you've got a PayPal account you can donate to, so which would be fantastic.
Thanks, Gerry.
So there you have it. That's all for this episode of Bringing Design Closer. If you like this episode, feel free to visit thisishcd.com, where you can access our back catalogue of over 100 episodes, with episodes related to service design, product management, design research, and much, much more. And if you're interested in design and innovation training, feel free to check out our business, thisisdoing.com, where you can join online classrooms and learn from the world's best design and innovation leaders. Join the This Is HCD newsletter, where you'll receive updates from the network, and also, if you're interested, apply to join the Slack community on thisishcd.com. Stay safe, and until next time, take care.